Alrighty, folks, we are live. I'm George with Solo Suit, one of the founders. I'm here with my friend Ben. Ben, can you go ahead and
Hey, everybody.
tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Ben Jackson. I am one of the co-founders and chief product officers of a nonprofit called Upsolve. And what we do at Upsolve is help people break free from debt, get on their financial feet, and build wealth. And we do that through a really powerful tool called Chapter 7 Bankruptcy. And it's something that is really near and dear to my heart because when I was in my 20s, I had a ton of debt, like crushing, life-altering debt. And I spent many years just slaving away, driving Uber, Lyft, 60, 80 hours a week, trying to pay it off. Couldn't. I was drowning in just the interest payments. And bankruptcy was the thing ultimately that set me free and put me on the path to living the life that I live today, where I have a house and a family and things that I never really dreamed could be possible. And so I work with Upsolve and co-founded Upsolve so that I could help other people explore and discover that tool of bankruptcy as well.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, it sounds like a great tool. Can you tell us a little bit more about like what Upsolve does? How does it work for people?
Sure. So if you have debt, a lot of that debt can go away entirely through bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is a relatively complicated process. There are, depending on who you ask, up to 100 plus forms that you have to submit to do it. But if you do it and you do it right, much or all of your debt goes away. So what Upsolve does, you can think of effectively as TurboTax for bankruptcy. We ask you simple questions. We help you find the information you need. And then we take the answer to those questions, prepare your bankruptcy forms, put them in your hands, and give you instructions to go into court, file them, all the way through to the point where you get another piece of paper in your hands that says that your debt's gone.
Nice. Fantastic. Great. All right, folks, today we're going to be talking about what happens to your debt when you file for bankruptcy. All right, so Ben's going to be helping us explore this topic. As we get into it, I just want to give our standard disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. Ben, you're not a lawyer either, right?
I don't know. There's a technical definition. I have a JD. I don't have a bar license.
Same group as you, right? I have a JD as well. Right. So,
yes.
So folks, we aren't your attorneys. We aren't creating a legal relationship with you. Solicit's not a law firm. Upsolve's not a law firm. We aren't giving legal advice. This is just a webinar that we are doing. Already. So Ben, first question for you: where does your debt go when you file bankruptcy?
It's a great question. I'll give you the simple answer and then the slightly more complicated answer. The simple answer is that any debt that qualifies for bankruptcy relief goes away entirely. Meaning if you owe $50,000 to the credit card companies, you file bankruptcy and the court approves that filing, that $50,000 disappears. You don't owe it anymore. You have a fresh start. The slightly more complicated answer is that not all debt is eligible for bankruptcy, and we can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like to.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Maybe we could dive into like the different types of bankruptcy and
definitely.
What happens with each path.
Sure. Definitely don't want to get people too terribly confused on the types of bankruptcy. There are many types related to business and personal. For personal bankruptcy, the two that you're typically looking at are Chapter 13 bankruptcy and Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Chapter 13 bankruptcy is the one that many people often think of. It's the one you'll see commercials for on TV. And essentially what that is a negotiated plan to repay the debts that you owe. Usually it's for less than what you actually owe. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just a court-approved plan that kind of helps prevent people from seizing your assets and says to these creditors, this is the thing this person's going to do. But it's a negotiated plan to repay some or all of your debt. Chapter 7 bankruptcy is getting rid of that debt. It's going to the court saying, I can't pay this, taking advantage of the code, the law that allows this, and making that debt go away entirely.
Okay. So would it be safe to say like Chapter 7, would it be okay to say Chapter 7 is better than Chapter 13? Or is it not quite like that?
Yeah, debt relief is unique, George. Like when I had a ton of debt and I was trying to figure out what I needed to do, I actually went through kind of a long journey from, do I just repay this? Do I do like the Dave Ramsey snowball method kind of thing? Do I budget my way out? Do I get more jobs? What's consolidation? What's settlement? I don't know. And ultimately, I landed on Chapter 7 being the thing that worked best for me. And that's how debt relief is generally. And at Upsolve, what we help you do is state what it is that you care about, what you care about protecting, how much money you have, those sorts of things, and determine if Chapter 7 bankruptcy is the right thing for you. And if it is, you will get a fresh start on any debt that's covered under that bankruptcy filing.
Okay, fantastic. Right. So if you qualify for Chapter 7, that can be like a real boon to somebody in pretty dire straits on financial health.
I personally got rid of nearly $60,000 in credit card debt through Chapter 7, and it's the only reason that I'm here today and not still driving Uber and Lyft all day long.
Right.
So it definitely can be powerful.
And so that, and Chapter 7 led to like a discharge of the debt, right? Like practically like a deletion of the debt. Yep.
Debt gets deleted, goes away forever. Bankruptcy stays on your record, affecting credit and to some extent your ability to get certain types of loans, but there are ways to get around that and make it less of a problem for 8 years. At that point in time, and actually this just happened for me recently, it goes away and it's like it never happened in the first place. The debt's gone, the negative effects are gone, you've moved on with your life.
Oh, how did that feel when you
oh my God.
got through with that?
So having that debt felt like I had just this giant metal weight tied to my leg, like one of those old-timey ball and chain shackle things that you see in like a cartoon, right? And then I was just drowning, getting pulled down further and further in this ocean of debt. And the moment that I got that piece of paper from the court in my hand that said my debt was gone was one of the best days of my life. Like I felt like I could fly, honestly. I know that seems like an exaggeration, but I remember walking down the street in Austin, Texas, and I don't even think it was a nice day, but in my mind, it was like the nicest day of all time. I felt like I'd gotten my life back. It was amazing. One of the best feelings ever.
Oh, that's great. That is fantastic. Glad you made it through, Ben.
Yeah, me too.
That's for sure. How much do you have to be in debt to file bankruptcy? So, yeah, how much debt do you need to have in order for bankruptcy to make sense?
There aren't any rules for this. It's not like if you don't have $50,000 in debt, you can't file. If you do have $5,000, you can't. There's no hard and fast. The general rule of thumb is that it often doesn't make sense to file Chapter 7 bankruptcy unless you have at least $10,000 in debt. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Again, they're kind of personal to the individual. The biggest is that you can only file Chapter 7 bankruptcy every 8 years. So if you filed and you got rid of a small, or I know 10,000 is probably not small for most people. It wasn't for me. But if you get rid of a smaller amount of debt, like say $1,000, you could put yourself in a tough position if a few years down the road you have a whole bunch of debt. And so most experts will say something like $10,000 is a good floor, after which it's would potentially make sense to file Chapter 7 bankruptcy.
Right. Okay. So $10,000, right? Like, would it make sense? So $10,000 in debt would make sense for somebody who's making like $50,000 a year potentially, but if you're making like $200,000 a year, $10,000 in debt probably doesn't warrant bankruptcy. Does it come down to like a debt to income ratio oftentimes? It
often comes down to debt to income ratio. More than anything, though, it comes down to your personal needs and tolerance, right? Like that person that has $200,000 a year might have $10,000 in debt, and they know that 6 months from now they have $100,000 in expenses coming up for something like some medical expense, or they're having surgery, or they're going to lose their job, or something like that. And so that's part of what we do at Upsolve, is help people understand, okay, this is how much I can afford to pay towards this debt. This is how long that's actually going to take me. What are my options to get rid of it, whether that's bankruptcy or something else, and then give you the tools that you need to choose between those things. But as a general point, if you make a lot of money and you don't have a lot of debt, there are a little bit less, disruptive is not the right word, but a little bit simpler options to take to reduce that debt.
Right. Cool. Can bankruptcy clear all debt?
No, it can clear unsecured debt. And quick lesson on unsecured versus secured. So an unsecured debt is something that isn't tied to something else that you own. So a mortgage would be a secured debt, right? Because it's tied to your house. A car loan would be a secured debt because it's tied to your car. But a credit card isn't tied to anything, right? You just have the card, you charge it up, you pay it off. Same goes for things like personal loans. those are not tied to any asset, meaning if you didn't pay it, there's nothing in particular that the bank would take from you or that you've agreed to give back to the bank in the event that you don't make payments. And only unsecured debts are eligible for bankruptcy protection.
Only unsecured. So if you have an auto loan and you declare bankruptcy successfully, what happens to that auto loan?
Fun question. If that is something that you're curious about, I would definitely suggest going over and looking at the auto loan section on upsolve.org. There are a whole bunch of different scenarios. They boil down in general to three. You can give the car back and get rid of the rest of your debts. You can buy the car from the bank, often at an adjusted rate, because they're saying, hey, we would rather not repossess this and sell it. Let's negotiate to pay this at some lower rate. Or you can do what's called reaffirming the loan that you have, which means that you agree with the creditor to just continue making payments as you've been making them. But if you do that, your bankruptcy process does become a little bit more complicated. You will often have to go and appear in front of a judge and argue for why you need to keep your car, which is actually something that I did in my bankruptcy because I was driving Uber and Lyft as my primary income, couldn't get rid of my car, went in and argued for that and was able to keep it. So the loan doesn't go away in the bankruptcy. There are just ways to handle it that doesn't block your bankruptcy.
Fascinating. And then I imagine that varies depending on Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13, right? There's different scenarios there as well.
Yeah, there are different treatments of secured loans in both of those procedures.
Okay. Fascinating. What about student loans? Can they be discharged?
The question of the day, student loans. I definitely have them. Do you, George?
I have some student loans, yeah.
Yes. It's a fun topic in America. So historically, student loans couldn't be included in bankruptcies. You could file on everything else. Student loans do kind of feel like an unsecured debt, right? Like they're not going to come take your education from you if you don't make your student loan payments. But unfortunately, they're not protected. And up until, I believe it was like October, November of 2023, there really wasn't anything you could do about them at all in a bankruptcy setting. And that has recently changed. The Department of Justice issued a guidance that sort of formalized this procedure that had existed if you had a lawyer and they knew what they were doing, where you can say, hey, it's too hard for me to make payments on these student loans for one of these, I believe there's 10 qualifying reasons. Now it's fairly formalized such that if you can prove that hardship on your application and your loans meet some certain criteria, like you've been paying on them for a certain amount of time, you've had them for a certain amount of time, you can actually include your student loans in the bankruptcy filing. Upsolve built a tool to facilitate this in our bankruptcy products. I want to say, I was just telling George earlier, I just had a baby, so my brain scrambled on time, but I want to say it was like 6.5 months ago we released it. And we've now discharged, I want to say, close to $2 million in student loans through bankruptcy. So it is possible. If you're curious if yours qualify, you can use our free screener on our website, and it will help you figure that out.
Fantastic. Free screener at upsolve.org. Tell people to figure that
out. Upsolve.org. Nice.
Love it. Well, last question for me for you, Ben. What are you doing for Halloween?
Oh my gosh, what am I doing for Halloween? So I grew up in rural North Dakota in a Christian space where we didn't have Halloween. So I was only doing harvest parties. So as an adult, I have always leaned really, really hard, probably too hard, into Halloween. But because I have a baby this year, I'm not going to be able to do much other than dress him as a pumpkin. And I think that's a good consolation prize to my classic costumes.
Nice. Harvest party sounds like fun. That's great. I mean, we just decorate pretty much with pumpkins on our doorstep.
Yeah.
But
we weren't allowed to have costumes or trick or treat and all that stuff. So it was kind of like the consolation prize. I always wanted to do a real Halloween and like go as a wizard or something.
It's fascinating. Well, I'm going as a zookeeper this year. Kids
Great.
are going to we'll have an elephant and a cheetah and a giraffe.
I love it.
Yep.
I love that. I love the group costumes for Halloween.
Indeed. All right, well, cool. Let's get into some questions we have here from the audience. Folks, we reserve the rest of the webinar here for any questions that you have. Ben, willing to go out on a limb here. Ben's probably one of the most expert people on bankruptcy that we could talk to and have on this webinar.
So I appreciate that. Thank you.
If you have any questions, put them in here and we'll try to get them on to Ben. So let's see, what questions do we have? We got some claps from Up Privacy.
Thanks for the claps.
Yep, got some claps. And then let's see. Okay, Up Privacy is saying should I apply for bankruptcy for the credit cards that are dated from 2001 and 2002? I lived on credit card debt for several years. I don't know how much those debts are now, and I haven't had privacy for many years.
Okay. Yeah, if that credit card debt, regardless of how old, is putting you in a position now where your finances are suffering, where you feel like you can't meet your expenses, where you're not able to build wealth because you don't have anything left over after you pay your bills, it doesn't really matter how old it is, with one exception. If it has already been charged off and there's a lawsuit with a judgment against you, usually those judgments aren't treated the same way in bankruptcy, and it does complicate it a little bit. So what I would suggest you do is go to upsolve.org, take our free screener. It will actually pull in all of your debt information, and it'll tell you which of those things are able to be discharged in bankruptcy and which of them are not. And we can go from there. If it's something that it doesn't look like we're able to help you with, we'll help you get connected with a lawyer who can answer your questions with a free consultation.
Fantastic. Question from Anne. I filed a Chapter 7 for myself and accidentally got it dismissed. I missed it.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
I guess dismissal in bankruptcy is a bad thing. Yeah, that means it doesn't go through. Is that right?
Yeah, so you didn't get a discharge. So the good news is, and if it was just dismissed for like failing to respond or something like that, usually you'll be able to file again. The issue is just if you got a discharge within the last 8 years, or if it was dismissed with some kind of prejudice, meaning the judge said, hey, this person, I was talking to them and they, threw a shoe at me or something like that, and never let them file again. Which doesn't happen very often. Usually it's just because somebody didn't show up in court or something on the right date. So if you are interested in applying again, we have several articles on our website that talk about that scenario. So again, upsolve.org, click on the Learn Center, and then just search for dismissed bankruptcy or past bankruptcy, and there'll be information on there. And then if it does seem like you are eligible from that, feel free that application can actually help you refile.
Right. Okay. So Anne's also saying, so like what happens now, right? So you're saying I got dismissed, you can potentially like refile. She's also saying no one showed to my creditors meeting.
No one showed to your creditors meeting. Interesting. And I'm curious, was it dismissed because no one showed to your creditors meeting, or are those two separate things?
Sounds like she's saying it was dismissed. Sounds like she's saying it was dismissed because she missed a document when filing.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So that's usually not something that's going to prevent you from filing again. So what I would suggest doing first, just so you can kind of get a sense of the status of your case, whatever court you filed it at, call them or go in person and talk to the court clerk and just say, hey, my name's Ann. I was trying to do this application in the past. It looked like there was some sort of issue. Would I be able to file again? They'll know based on the current status of your case, because it does sort of vary based on what the actual outcome of that was when they closed it. They'll be able to tell you, can you file again or not? And then you can double check it with the information on our website. And if you can, great, we'll help you go through with the whole thing.
Okay, fantastic. And so basically a dismissal of bankruptcy means that it doesn't go through, right? So the bankruptcy is rejected essentially by the bankruptcy court. How does discharge factor into this? You're saying good thing there wasn't a discharge. Isn't a discharge the desired outcome?
It's a great question. So dismissal just means that the case was thrown out for some reason. And there are many different reasons it can be thrown out. It could be thrown out because the trustee said this person lied. It could be thrown out because, like you said, you forgot to file a document. You didn't respond to follow-up questions, things like that. And depending on the severity and type of this dismissal will determine what's likely to happen when you next file a bankruptcy case. Again, it does vary a lot, so I would talk to the clerk at that bankruptcy court where you filed. A discharge is what you want. That's the end of the whole bankruptcy process where the judge says, great, you're eligible for a bankruptcy. This stack of debt that you have is now gone. That's called a discharge.
Right. Okay, fantastic. Question from Karen. Will my credit score go down after filing Chapter 7?
It really depends. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it actually goes up. It depends on the type of debt you had on your record, how old it was, and how that debt is affecting your credit. If everything was charged off already, so sent off to collectors, gone past statute of limitation dates, no lawsuits, judgments, things like that, odds are your credit score is probably already bottomed out, and filing bankruptcy isn't going to affect it. And then sometimes filing bankruptcy actually has a small pop in your credit score because of the way that the debts are handled in reporting post-filing. For myself personally, my score went down, I want to say, when I originally filed, I think it went down about 100 to 150 points. I was lucky. I had been making payments, so my credit score hadn't dropped all that much in the first place, but it would have had I not done something about the debt. And that 150-point drop was essentially completely back to normal within about 2 years. And I did that not knowing anything at all about how to boost credit, which there are many ways to boost credit post-bankruptcy, and we have guides to all of them at upsolve.org.
Right. Yeah, 100-point drop isn't that bad.
No, I was honestly shocked.
Right.
I think sometimes, right, so your credit score is a signal to banks about how risky it is to give you money. And sometimes, if you're in a situation like that where you're doing fairly well, you file bankruptcy so that you don't do badly. Sometimes that's actually a signal that this is somebody that, is trying to be responsible with their finances. And if there's any one thing I would leave you all with, it's that bankruptcy often feels gross. It kind of feels like a failure. I know it did for me, but the reality is it isn't. And it can be a really powerful tool to put you back on track, to take control of your future, be able to provide for your family, be able to build wealth. And, like I like to say, be able to live the American dream. And I hope that hearing my story, if you're somebody struggling with debt, encourage you to maybe check it out, see if it's something that could help you.
Nice. Yeah, and then, 2 years. 2 years might seem like a long time, but I think once it's over, it oftentimes passes a lot faster than you thought. Right.
Oh, 100%. And it's definitely better than paying all of your monthly income towards the interest on your credit cards.
Right. Right. Great. Moving on to the next question. Question from Ahmad regarding judgments that are wiped away in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. If there is a judgment against you, but that does not show up on your credit report, can it be included in a Chapter 7?
It's a good question. So it kind of depends on the judgment type. And if you do have a judgment against you, I would suggest that you work with a lawyer. We have resources to find a local lawyer on our website, again, at upsolve.org, because it can complicate the case a little bit. If you do want to just see if you are eligible to do it on your own, you can still go through our tool. It will ask about the judgments, and it'll help you figure out if this is or is not something that can be included. It is a little tricky, and it does kind of depend on the current status and type of the judgment. Common types, so things like judgments for child support payments, those can't be discharged in bankruptcy.
What about a judgment for like a credit card debt?
So it again kind of depends on its status. So I would suggest if you do have judgments against you in a court case, that you work with a lawyer when you file your bankruptcy. Now, having something that isn't dischargeable, just to be clear, doesn't mean you can't file bankruptcy on the rest of your debt. You can exclude certain debts from your bankruptcy filing and get rid of them. You would just then have to deal with those other debts that weren't discharged separately, which a lot of people do.
Great. In your experience after filing bankruptcy, have you seen people receive offers for credit cards? I've spoken with a couple bankruptcy attorneys that say, actually, oftentimes you get a ton of offers.
It does happen a lot.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, it's often credit cards that are aimed at credit building. So there are types of credit cards that are secured by money. So you say, I'm going to give you $300, and then I'm going to borrow against that money every month and effectively pay myself back interest, and that gets reported to the credit bureaus. So a lot of them are like that. Others are just like super high interest rate credit cards that they don't care if you have some credit risk in your history because they're collecting a whole bunch of money on it. So I would encourage anybody who files bankruptcy and is getting these offers to be really careful to read the fine print terms on those, because I give you money, credit builder card, those can be a great resource because you're only really in debt to yourself. You know, super high interest credit cards could end up putting you back in the position you were in before.
Right. A question from Brandon.
Mm-hmm.
I think this will be the last question for today. Can IRS debt be discharged in Chapter 7 bankruptcy?
Usually not, unfortunately.
And that's tax debt, essentially, right? It's like synonymous
with
tax debt.
Tax debt usually cannot. If you do have tax debt, we have some resources on our website about a process called offer and compromise, where you can essentially call the IRS and work with them on a negotiated payment plan. And it does work fairly well for people who have the money to pay it off. If you don't have the money to pay it off, often you end up in a tough position. But a bankruptcy lawyer who's skilled at this process can help you, and we can help you find those for free on our website.
Nice. Fantastic. All right, folks, we've taken a lot of your questions here. If we didn't get to your question verbally on the webinar, Hannah has been helping us in the chat. Hopefully she was able to get to your questions. If not, we do these webinars about once a week, so come back next time. We'll try to get to your question. Ben, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been too long in coming. I'm glad to be here. If you ever want me to hop on again, I'm happy to do it.
It was do it again sometime. Where can people find out more from you?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like I'm a broken record at this point. Upsolve.org. Head on over there. We have articles about just about everything you could imagine related to debt and credit. And we also have a YouTube channel. I believe we're at Upsolve BK, I want to say. But if you search Upsolve and debt in YouTube, you'll find us, and you'll see my shining face on there talking about all sorts of debt topics.
Fantastic. Love it. All right, folks. Thanks for showing up.